At home, in the gym, up a ladder, on the road, interstate, outer space. Download the ABC Listen.
ABC News, good afternoon, I'm Melissa Polomini. The Greens have described a housing policy aimed at helping people buy a property as tinkering around the edges. During last year's election campaign, Labor committed to introducing a new program called Help to Buy. Under the shared equity scheme, 40,000 Australians will be able to buy a property with a 2% deposit. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has today announced it will start next year. But Greens leader Adam Bandt says it will do little to address the housing crisis.
Now, Labor's announced a reheated election policy from the October budget, but with 8 million people renting and only 40,000 of these new places on offer, these new places will be rarer than Willy Wonka golden tickets.
The Matildas' semi-final defeat to England in the FIFA World Cup was the most watched TV program since the current audience measurement system began in 2001. Channel 7 says preliminary data shows an average audience of 7.13 million viewers. There was also just over 11 million people watching the broadcast at one point. It beats the quarter-final audience when Australia defeated France, as well as Kathy Freeman's 2000 Olympic gold medal and any AFL, NRL or tennis broadcast of the past 22 years. Meanwhile, police say there needs to be a review into last night's unruly behaviour at Melbourne's Federation Square during the Matildas' semi-final loss. Spectators knocked down a security fence after the live site reached its capacity of 10,000, with an extra 2,000 fans crowding into the venue. More than 50 flares were set off, with many landing in the crowd. Acting Chief Commissioner Wendy Steendam says police will speak to Fed Square management about security arrangements.
There needs to be a review, obviously, of what happened. There's many different access and entry points at Fed Square, and that's part of the challenge. I think what needs to be done now is a review of the arrangements and what occurred last night and looking for opportunities to improve.
A Melbourne court has heard how a Ballarat mother of four pleaded for help in the days before her death, fearing her enraged friend would hurt her. Rochelle Kirkham reports.
Shannon Jeffrey fatally assaulted 42-year-old Kobe Parfitt in her Ballarat home in April 2020. Jeffrey had become enraged, believing Miss Parfitt had dobbed her into police and sold her possessions while she was in prison, leading Miss Parfitt to fear for her life. Jeffrey dumped Miss Parfitt's body in a mine shaft 30 kilometres from Ballarat to cover up the crime. It was found almost 8 months later during a police investigation after Miss Parfitt was reported missing. Jeffrey pleaded guilty to manslaughter earlier this year and appeared at the Supreme Court today for a hearing. She'll be sentenced next month.
Hillsong founder Brian Houston says he's relieved to be acquitted of concealing his father's sexual abuse of a child. The 69-year-old previously told a Sydney court he was speechless in 1999 when he learned of Frank Houston's abuse of a 7-year-old boy, but didn't go to police because he was respecting the victim's wishes. A magistrate today found he had a reasonable excuse for not reporting the matter. Outside court, Mr. Houston acknowledged his father was a serial pedophile.
I've been found not guilty today, but in fact I've always been not guilty. I want to express my sadness to Brett Sensock, genuine sadness about what my father did to him and all his victims. He was obviously a serial pedophile. We probably will never know the extent of his pedophilia.
Overseas US officials say Washington will continue to seek the safe return of an American soldier who crossed into North Korea last month. It comes a day after Pyongyang reported he'd sought refuge there. The US National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says North Korea's claims about Travis King cannot be trusted. North Korea broke its silence over the American soldier on Wednesday, claiming he'd run across the border with the South because he'd experienced maltreatment and discrimination in the US Army. To the weather now, there's a strong wind warning for Port Phillip and the Central Coast. For Victoria, cloudy with scattered showers extending slowly eastwards. The chance of thunderstorms in the far west this afternoon and early tonight. Showers falling as snow above 1,200 metres. For Melbourne, the high chance of showers becoming more frequent by tonight. Showers tomorrow and 13 Saturday, a shower or two with a top of 16. It's currently 12 degrees. ABC News. ABC Radio Melbourne, traffic.
Hello there, Louis Zacher from the Department of Transport and Planning. In Newport, the boom gates are staying down at the Maddox Road level crossing. It's due to a fault. Never cross train lines when boom gates are down. That line is still live. There are still trains running on that set of tracks. Victoria Police is attending. Use Melbourne Road or Millers Road to avoid that closure. On the Princes Freeway, Geelong bound, just after Avalon Road, that's at the Lara exit, a collision's in the left emergency lane. There's Victoria Police attending with red and blue flashing lights on. That means you need to slow down to 40. And in Melton West on High Street at James Cook Drive, just out front of the shopping centre, a lane closed in both directions due to a collision. There'll be some works happening shortly in Melville Road and Dawson Street through Brunswick West. That starts Friday night for tram renewal along Route 58. Buses to replace those trams between Royal Park and Bell Street. More details on the Yarra Trams website. That's the latest traffic and transport. It's 4:06.
You're with Raf Epstein on ABC Radio Melbourne.
I'm getting memories of people. Apparently there used to be two-up games at the Knott pub, and that's sort of before World War II. Very clearly Notting Hill became a much bigger place after the establishment of Monash University next door, and Notting Hill, the actual suburb, the bits and pieces of Melbourne called Notting Hill, grew after that. I'll get back to your unofficial history. One thing I've never understood, I don't get why there aren't more bus lanes on freeways. Rail's great, tram's great, but if you're going to build a road, why not stick a bus lane on it? Why not at least at peak hour have, I don't know, electric buses? It seems to me a really easy way to get more people onto public transport and have less cars on the road. Someone texting me, more buses, are you serious? They're everywhere. No name on this text. They're a blight on Melbourne's transport. More investment in rail, please, and get buses and trucks off the roads. But buses are a great way to get cars off the roads. Government ministers I've asked on the air, and government people have told me off the air, people don't like buses. That's why they don't invest in them. I return again and again to the fastest growing part of Australia, the western suburbs of Melbourne. Once you get past a place like Caroline Springs, to suburbs like Taylors Hill, all the way through to those new suburbs on the way out to Melton, they're lucky to get a bus every half hour at peak hour. And even then, the bus only goes to a train station. There's limits on the number of trains that bus can get you to. If you had buses in a bus lane on something like the Westgate Tunnel, wouldn't that make a difference? I have asked that question again and again. I'm never quite sure that I know what the answer is. Others have been asking the same question. The Committee for Melbourne is a group of people, business leaders, academics, concerned about the future of Melbourne. You might have heard their CEO, Mark Melvin. He joined Sammy J this morning to just talk about how little investment they believe has been put into the bus network.
Less than 2% of journeys are taken on the buses, and if we can increase that number, you can take up to 100 million car journeys off the roads. That reduces congestion, that reduces carbon in the atmosphere, you know, so there's real benefits out of reforming buses, electrifying them. We have less than 60 kilometres of bus lanes.
We have less than 60 kilometres of bus lanes. I'll repeat what I said before. I don't understand why there isn't a bus lane on something like the Westgate Tunnel. There's two ways to get here from the west, the Westgate Bridge and the Westgate Tunnel. There's no dedicated bus lane. It has always seemed reasonably sensible to me to have a dedicated bus lane and a network of buses getting people into the city. Department of Transport people, government people have told me since I started this job 12 years ago, people don't like taking buses. We put on bus services. They don't like getting on them. Why don't we have more buses? Is it because buses just aren't as sexy? They're not an infrastructure project. There's no cranes, no hard hats with a bus. Is that the reason? 1300 222 774. We'll keep talking about the legacy of the Matildas as well. And the really unfortunate scenes, I had no idea it happened. I went to watch at the Not Round ground with 20,000 of my closest friends, a giant TV. I had no idea of the trouble at Fed Square. It's still up in the air whether or not Fed Square will be a live site on Saturday night for the third place game when the Matildas play Sweden. And the Premier, Dan Andrews, well, clearly no one's made a decision because he was very non-committal about whether or not the Saturday night game would be live streamed into Fed Square.
As for what happens on Saturday night, I think Victoria Police are being appropriately consulted from a safety point of view, and I think it's best we leave it to them to make assessments, and then if there are announcements to be made, they'll be made.
Let me know if you were in Fed Square. If you saw that, I had no idea all that stuff was happening with the flares. Went home, went to bed, had no idea. It doesn't say anything about the sport, but it's a problem for Fed Square. It's a problem if that section of the crowd is associated with the great, fantastic, beautiful game that we call football. And tell me about your unofficial history of Notting Hill. Give us a call.
Raf Epstein on ABC Radio Melbourne.
Is the problem that buses aren't sexy, right? There's no hard hat, there's no high-vis top, there's not nearly as many construction jobs, but they're also a hell of a lot cheaper. Peter Parker runs a great blog that we've consulted more than a few times. It's the Melbourne on Transit blog. And Peter was a planner, a bus planner, in the past with the Department of Transport. Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon, Raf. How are you?
Why don't we have more buses?
Well, I think you touched on some of the points. They can be much better than they are. Some parts in Melbourne have quite good buses, but there's just not very many parts. Like parts of Doncaster, for instance, there are buses along the freeway. They do run quite frequently, but too many parts of Melbourne, they're not. And we can even take Notting Hill as an example. You've got Route 693 along Ferntree Gully Road. Major east-west road goes into the back of Monash, and that only runs every hour on weekends and finishes at 9 p.m. So a lot of it is the service. It's not frequent enough for the times that people wish to travel.
Do people want buses, do you think?
Absolutely. And when you provide frequent buses, then people will use them, and especially on the weekends. An example of success is the Smart Bus program, which was introduced about 15 years ago. There are buses that, by Melbourne standards, are very frequent. They're every 15 minutes on weekdays, every half hour on weekends, and you've got buses like the 902 along Springvale Road on weekends, and it can be standing room almost. And previously, before Smart Bus, there is almost no service. So if you can do that with buses every 30 minutes, imagine what you can do with buses every 5 or 10 minutes. And people have looked at what happens when you increase bus frequency and the service is more attractive and more people use it. So there's a virtuous circle you get when you improve buses, provided they're on fast, frequent and direct routes.
I have had bureaucrats and senior politicians swear to me, adamantly in private conversation, no, when we put on buses, people don't take them. And then I say, well, that's because you haven't put on enough buses. And they say it's impossible. There must be a reason. In New South Wales, the former Liberal government committed to a rail project that's blown out by $25 billion instead of buying buses. Maybe the politicians are onto something. Maybe they're building big freeways and big train networks because people don't actually like them.
Well, New South Wales is an interesting example because, yes, they have had issues with infrastructure, but they've also invested in service, whereas we've tended to go for the big build infrastructure, which is good, but we haven't done much with service. So in the case of Sydney, there's now trains every 15 minutes until midnight, whereas here it's every half hour. In Sydney, there are buses that run every 10 minutes, 7 days a week, whereas our premium smart bus routes are often only every half hour. So I think that a lot of it comes down to service planning, like a bus that's every 40 minutes meandering through that takes ages to get anywhere can sometimes have problems attracting passengers. Depending on the planning, you can have coordination, can be quite poor with trains. We've got parts of Melbourne like the new Reservoir Station, which the government opened. Most of its bus routes don't connect with trains. The train might be every 20 minutes. The bus might be every 23 minutes. So it's pretty much potluck whether you get a good connection or not, and often there's not much in the way of passenger information, like network maps sometimes can be quite hard to find at stations.
So you don't think they're doing it well. Can I ask you another one, Peter? Because this state government actually often bring this up. There's going to be a huge bus interchange for the North-East link, so where the ring road drops down to the Eastern Freeway, so it comes from the north down to the Eastern Freeway, and I think it's in Bulleen. They are building a massive bus station there as a big park and ride. Is that the exception or the norm when it comes to this government of buses?
Generally, it's the exception because especially the northeast Doncaster area and Bulleen, because Doncaster has 7 premium service bus routes called smart buses, which are more frequent and they run longer at night, whereas the whole outer west of Melbourne has none. So out in the outer west, your buses might only be every 40 minutes. They might finish at 9 p.m, whereas you've got a huge difference in service, and especially where you've got people that are working casual and on weekends. The areas that need it most in the outer north and outer west actually have the least bus service. And same also in Greater Dandenong. There are major bus routes like the 800 down Princes Highway to Chadstone, only every 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Yet we know that people at Chadstone wanting to shop then and have jobs.
Well, we'll keep the conversation going, Peter. I have had this conversation on air and off air with people who make the decisions. We'll see where it gets to. Thanks once again for your time.
Thanks, Raf. A pleasure.
Peter Parker runs the Melbourne On Transit blog, and he used to work in the Department of Transport on buses. Kay's in Middle Park. What do you want to say about the buses, Kay?
Well, I reckon that they need smaller buses because most of the buses they have are giant and they're very expensive, I imagine.
Cheaper than a train.
Electric. Sorry, cheaper than train. Yeah,
cheaper than a train, yeah.
But they're difficult for people with mobility issues to get onto and off of.
Yep.
They do, swerve around a little bit.
And I think that's part of the Melbourne conversation, Kay. People in Melbourne don't like. Maybe they'd like them more if there were more of them. Maybe. I know it's sort of chicken and egg. John's in Altona. What do you want to mention, John?
I just wanted to say that there is a good bus service that actually runs up Millers Road in Altona to the city. Runs every 5 minutes during peak and every 10 minutes off peak.
And that one's pretty. People use that a lot, don't they?
Yeah, awful lot. It's very good service. Goes over the West Gate, straight into the city, drops you at Southern Cross, goes all the way through to Victoria Market.
Yeah, we need a lot more of that. Well, so John, that was my query. I'm aware of that bus service. That's why I'm always curious. Now that we've got a Westgate Tunnel, which is another, duplication of that route, not quite, but almost. Why isn't there a dedicated bus lane? That would seem, I don't know. It seems to make sense to me. I'm not a transport planner. I'm happy to listen to the voices of experts. David's in Essendon. You were in Fed Square last night, David.
I certainly was, Raf, yep.
And what was it like?
Well, Fed Square is the Wild West, Raf. There is no security there. The police won't enter the perimeters. And basically it's a lawless society. And I've been going there since the 2006 World Cups.
Right.
And I don't fear for my life there. I'm a mature age guy. I was there with my kids, and I wasn't worried or anything. But it is truly, as people are saying, and it's totally lawless. And you could walk through the gates there or through the turnstiles with a flamethrower, and no one would stop you.
That's terrible. So, what do you think? I'm very conscious that mostly young kids. I'm sure there's some blokes in their 20s as well. But how do you it's clearly dangerous. We clearly don't want people lighting flares because it's dangerous and taking down barriers. How would you influence their behaviour, David? What would be the best way, do you think?
Well, and I'm not suggesting it's a conspiracy theory going on here, but I'd say there's a couple of things that they're not doing, Federation Square management. One, there's no security and they're not checking anybody, and they're just letting everybody walk through with backpacks full of...
So were you wandered last night, David? Because when I went into the Square Stadium... Right, okay, we were all wandered and... Yeah. Although I don't know if the metal detector wouldn't pick up the flare.
No, but flares you put in your sock or wherever you put them, it's fine.
Yeah.
But they don't put any entertainment on. The kids are there for a matter of 2 hours before the game.
Yeah.
They are bored out of their minds.
Maybe.
Put something on the screen. Play a DJ, something.
Although I don't know how were there controlled gateways into Fed Square as well, David? Because, normally it's an open space.
Yeah, there was pathways there of just little, like a metre high fence, just little fences, but they were sort of demandable, so people just pulled them out and jumped in anyway.
And you weren't turned off, David. You went anyway despite the flares and happy to stay with your kids?
I've seen every World Cup game that Australia men and women have played there for the last 15 years, I'd say, more.
Oh,
so, no, it's great. It's fabulous. I'm 50. I don't have a problem there. There's a few level-headed people there, and I think that's...
Well, I assume most people are. It's just some who aren't. Look, great, David. I'm glad you weren't deterred. It clearly will deter a lot of people, and that's the issue. And, I mean, you can't have 50 flares let off in a big crowd. I mean, we know, like last night, luckily no one was hurt, no one was injured, but I mean, just, you know, we've got the resources in a country, in a city like this, to make that better. This text from Sarah in Mordialloc. I guess it was only a matter of time till the A-League bros infiltrated the family-friendly Women's World Cup crowds. Stay away, boys. We don't need you. And someone else got this observation, which is probably fair. For heaven's sake, stop calling them supporters or fans. They were neither. They armed themselves with flares that only belong on boats. They went there purposely to endanger people and cause trouble. I had an amazing time last night. I have had an amazing World Cup ride. I'm very conscious that I'm enjoying it just because I'm a sports fan, and I have a particular love and fascination for the World Cup, nation v nation, the beautiful game. A pleasure I don't get watching my beloved Carlton Blues, but there was something else going on as well, right? We're watching women's sport like never before. The TV ratings are in. We know that we had one of our busiest days on the ABC Listen app yesterday. So something's going on. We'll have a look at those TV figures. Tell me what you think the legacy of the Matildas is, and tell me your unofficial history of Notting Hill. Some traffic first with Louis Zacher. Hi, Louis.
Hi, Raf. In Newport, the boom gates are staying down at the Maddox Road level crossing. That's due to a fault, with technicians hoping to restore that soon, but never head across train lines while boom gates are down. Victoria Police is attending that incident. On the Princes Freeway, heading towards Geelong at the Avalon Road overpass, that's the Lara excess. The left lane is now out of action as tow trucks remove vehicles involved in a collision. There is 2 lanes getting by, but there's a bit of congestion. It's right at the entry ramp of Avalon Road. So just be patient, let those drivers in, and we'll all enjoy our drive this afternoon. On High Street at Melton West, James Cook Drive, a lane closed in both directions due to an earlier collision. That's the latest traffic and transport. It's 4:22.
Journalists and politicians are natural enemies in some ways, but when you break bread with the enemy, it's surprising what you can find out. I'm Annabelle Crabb, and I'm back with a brand new season of Kitchen Cabinet. Here's the deal. I invite myself to a prominent politician's house, they cook me dinner, and I bring dessert. I'm polite, but I'm nosy. Join me for all new Kitchen Cabinet, Tuesday nights on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
Raf Epstein on ABC Radio Melbourne.
David, you're in Macrae now, but you sent this lovely text. I was a member of the Notting Hill Hotel CB Radio Club. Notting Hill Hotel CB Radio Club. Used to meet at the pub, The Knot, regularly. I was also a student at Monash during the 70s. A guy named Stuart Roth used to do weekly cartoons for The Knot, published in the Monash student rag called Lot's Wife. I have many fond memories of that pub. And a bus driver text, signed anonymously, but says she or he, bus driver. How do we get data on the passengers on the buses? Being a bus driver, over half the passengers don't touch on, and I haven't had ticket checkers on my bus for 6 months. Number 2, buses run late. People lose trust if they can't make it to their destination on time. And the reason most of the timetables haven't changed for 30 years, and the traffic has multiplied a number of times. So people don't trust them because the timetable hasn't changed, but the traffic volumes have gone up. This final part of the text, bus operator rostering at times is made to make money, and a lot of times we are planning to run late. That's signed for an anonymous bus driver. Christina's calling from Coburg. What do you want to mention, Christina?
Yeah, I'm a regular user of the bus. I get to work most of the time on the bus, and other people I know who use the bus with some regularity actually do quite enjoy it. But I think that you're right about the Melbourne public's perception of buses is not as an attractive form of public transport.
Wait, what are the suburbs you go to and from for work on the bus?
I go to and from Coburg and Essendon, so I live in Coburg and work in Essendon. So it's actually the best, most direct option for me to get from A to B. Otherwise, I'd have to get the train, into North Melbourne and then back out again on a different train line. And people I know who use the bus, it's good for getting between suburbs like that rather than trains and trams are quite oriented to and from the city for the most part.
Interesting. Look, I think you're not inner north, Christina, but you're also not far north. I think the buses are decent in that part of the world. Similar text. For the first half of the year, I regularly caught the bus along Bell Street from Glenroy to Preston. Great service, well used. The reason local police might think no one catches it is because no one touched on and I never saw an inspector. So that might be part of it. But I think the bus problems are, so a lot of the inner north and then out to the east, places like Doncaster, reasonably well serviced. It's the further out you go north and definitely to the west. Once you get over the Westgate Bridge, that's where there's a significant lack of buses. It's coming up to, I'll call that 25 after 4. Carl Quinn joins us. He's usually talking movies, but he's been looking at the TV ratings. I can tell you the ABC Listen app in Melbourne had one of its best days yesterday. I'm